Then I take you the video. I take this
Father was ambassador at the Vatican. Professor Caneva, ambassadors, flag officers, former and current colleagues of the United Nations, students, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be able to address these few words to you today. The European Association of International Studies is a unique association comprising students of different nationalities from many universities, all strongly committed to education, peace, human rights, and solidarity with all peoples of the world. It is led by an outstanding humanitarian, educator, organizer, leader, and humble servant of God, Professor Massimo Maria Caneva. It is a pleasure and privilege to be able to call him friend. Professor Caneva's tireless work for at least a quarter century and commitment to peace and education has created a unique platform that brings together civil society leaders, universities, students, governments, and the United Nations. The association is firmly supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy, the European Union, and has been a civil society partner of the United Nations Office at Geneva for over 10 years. I'm happy to highlight the long-term nature of our collaboration and remember fondly my first interaction with the association during meetings at the Foreign Ministry in Rome and subsequent 2 visits of the association to the United Nations office at Geneva. It is all the more fitting and timely that AESI should be focusing on a subject that is so important and so central to the entire discussion about multilateralism, international organizations, and their role. This subject is the United Nations Security Council and its overdue reform. It has become quite the mantra lately that multilateralism is in crisis, the UN is irrelevant. However, we need to be honest with ourselves and clear about this. It is not just multilateralism or the United Nations that are in crisis. It is the entire post-war system that is in crisis. It has been in crisis since the collapse of the bipolar world some 35 years ago, but this has deepened in recent times. This is due in large measure to the national egoism that has eclipsed the multilateral state of mind and taken precedence over international law and human civilized cohabitation. This situation underscores the predicament of the international institutions that were created as the physical embodiment of precisely that multilateral state of mind that existed 80 years ago. We need to be clear about what the United Nations organization is. It is a state-driven organization created by and for the states. We also need to be clear about the term United Nations. It is in its everyday usage, whether by diplomats, journalists, or civil society, the term UN, by ignorance or intent, is substituted in their minds by the term UN Secretariat. In reality, the UN Secretariat is just one of the 5 principal organs of the organization. Yet it is the object of all the criticism and, importantly, of budget cutting, which in past decades, going back to the early 90s, but particularly in recent years, has taken the place of reform. The United Nations organization, and more specifically and quite undeservedly the UN Secretariat, constantly get a black eye as the international community asks in righteous indignation absolutely justified questions. Why can't the UN stop the war in Syria? Why can't the UN stop the war in Ukraine? Why can't the UN stop the tragedy in Sudan? And many others. The answers to these questions do not lie on the doorstep of the UN Secretariat or of the organization as a whole. The buck always winds up on that horseshoe-shaped table of the Security Council. That is where the blockage is. The blockage cannot be remedied, as some members of the Security Council propose, by a mechanical increase in the membership, even though it would make for a better geographic representation. Indeed, if 5 members, permanent members, cannot agree, why would 10 permanent members be more prone to agree? It's an absurdity. In my opinion, the biggest obstacle for Security Council members to engage in intense diplomatic negotiations in the search for compromise, in give and take, everything that diplomacy provides every tool for, is the veto power. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council, or the P5 for short, possess an enormous advantage over the remaining 188 members of the UN because they won a war 80 years ago. The elimination of the veto power would compel the most powerful countries on the Security Council to engage in more diplomacy and hard negotiation, hammering out true negotiated compromise decisions, thus palpably improving the international scene and saving countless lives. The power of the veto also hampers the work of the UN Secretary General, not only as an individual, but importantly as an institution. I fear that this predicament will persist until such time as the Secretary General, man or woman, is no longer totally under the control of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and has the latitude to perform as the UN Charter requires. For all these positive things to happen, however, these 5 countries should demonstrate outstanding leadership and collectively renounce the principle of unanimity of the permanent 5, also known as the veto. More so, that all 5 of them have many other advantages going for them and will keep them primus inter pares anyway. But that, unfortunately, is not practically feasible anytime soon in the absence of a mindset of strong multilateralism, informed by a modicum of altruism, reinforced by enlightened self-interest. I'm often asked if I am hopeful about the next generation of diplomats and international civil servants. I am indeed hopeful. My hope and optimism are based on 2 things. First, that the idea of a universal organization and of diplomacy as a tool are deeply rooted and necessary despite their detractors. And second, most important, I am well acquainted with many different student bodies in different countries, different regions, educational institutions, as I have often met and continue to meet with student groups. When I look into their eyes, see their body language, and hear their questions, I am reassured that the future of diplomacy and of human relationships are in safe hands. I would like to express the hope that the member states of this organization finally come around to realizing that this organization is in everybody's interest. It was not created to cater to every selfish wish, but to make space where issues that were intractable outside could be discussed, negotiated, and resolved jointly for the benefit of all, within the chambers that were tailor-made for this purpose. There is a quote from Churchill that I like to cite. Almost 80 years ago, in a speech at the University of Zurich, Winston Churchill illustrated the ultimate responsibility of states in reinforcing multilateralism. He said, "The League of Nations did not fail because of its principles or conceptions. It failed because those principles were deserted by those states which brought it into being." The United Nations organization came into being because back then, over 80 years ago, a multilateral mindset existed that allowed the organization to be created. That mindset needs to be rekindled. But we cannot afford to do it by the same means, those of a cataclysmic war, because it could well be humanity's last. Thank you very much, and I wish you a productive meeting.